Hello, everyone. Welcome to the seventh webinar in our Mennonite Central Committee series on immigration and border realities. My name is Saulo Padilla, and I'm the Immigration Education Coordinator for MCC US. Today's topic is advocacy. We have heard in the past 6 webinars what is happening across the country at the border and outside the US related to migration, how immigrant communities and individuals who were already vulnerable before COVID-19 outbreak are even more vulnerable now. So for the next 75 minutes, we'll talk with staff in the MCC Washington office about how we can advocate to the US Congress for more fair and just immigration policies. We will learn about the issues where advocacy is most needed right now and how we can set up an in-person or virtual meeting with staff from the offices of our members of Congress. Our panelists today are Kate Parsons and Tammy Alexander. Kate works on US policy toward Latin America and Asia, and Tammy focuses on immigration and climate change. All attendees on this webinar are muted, so you'll need to submit your responses to questions or questions to panelists by using the Q&A feature on Zoom. If you're not familiar with Zoom, look on the bottom of your Zoom window. In the middle, click on Q&A, and it will bring up a window to your right. If you have a question for a specific panelist, please include their name. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Kate. Hello, Kate.
Hi, Saulo. Thanks so much. And thank you to everyone who decided to share your Tuesday afternoon with us on this 7th and final MCC immigration webinar. It's an honor to be sharing with you today about how you can take all of this immigration knowledge you have and put it into use advocating for better immigration policies. So I know, I'm sure that those of you who are on the call right now represent a wide range of experience and ability. Some of you might be brand new to this, some of you might be seasoned advocates, others of you do a lot of legal work through the courts. So we're going to start off with something a little interactive to kind of see who's in the room. I am going to share a poll right now. You should see a poll pop up in front of you, and I want you to go ahead and respond to these 3 questions and then hit submit. Don't worry, your name won't be attached to your answer. We'll just see an average as it comes in. And for those of you who are maybe calling in or can't see the screen, I'll just read really quickly the 3 questions. One of them asks, have you ever written a letter or an email to your member of Congress? The second one asks if you've ever met with them. And then the final question is, do you have beliefs or opinions that you want your representative or senator to know? So I'll give you about 10 seconds to answer, and then I'm going to share the answers with all of you. So if you're having any technical difficulties, you open up the screen. You should see just a poll right in front of you. Go ahead and click and make sure you hit submit. All right, 5 more seconds. Oh, great. It looks like almost all of you have voted. So I'm going to go ahead and share it. So 71% of you have already written a letter. That's great. The majority of you have. Hopefully some of you received the letters that we send out that will end up going to your members of Congress. Those are always really helpful. And it's great to hear that 43% of you have already met in person or perhaps virtually with your representative or senators. That's a lot more than I was even thinking. So that shows me that a lot of you are bringing some concrete experience into this. And finally, 94% of you have something that you want to share with your member of Congress. And that's the one I really want to highlight. For those of you who don't have something you want to share, hopefully today's training gives you something that you want to share with them. But just to sort of start us off, I want to emphasize that you don't need experience, you don't need deep knowledge or close political analysis to be able to be an effective advocate. You just need to have something that you're passionate about, that you want to share, that you want to make sure that your member of Congress knows. So that's kind of the broad overview that I want to start us off with. But wait, there's more. I'm just going to ask a couple other quick questions now that you're also great at polling. To talk a little bit about why, today we're talking about congressional advocacy. It's not the only type of advocacy, but I want to explain why we're focusing on this with you all today. So, poll number 2, Who enforces immigration law? And the question is, which branch of the US government enforces immigration law? The options are executive branch, legislative branch, or judicial branch, or some combination of the three. So now that you're all pros, I'll just give you a couple seconds to answer that, and then we'll share the answers again. Good work, everyone. I was afraid there were going to be technical difficulties, but you are all clearly Zoom pros by now. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so mixed answers here, and I apologize in advance because this is kind of a trick question. The branch of government that enforces immigration law is the executive branch, but all three end up impacting it. So if you answered all three, you have a strong argument there. Congress sets immigration law, but enforcement lies with the president and his administration, so the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice. Administrations can also do a lot of tweaking the laws through policy memos or executive orders, things like that. And courts get involved when the administration acts in a way that violates the laws that Congress has passed. We've been seeing a lot of that lately, most recently with DACA. So if we care about immigration, I think is the question, why aren't we spending more or all of our energy advocating to the executive branch? There's two reasons why we're focused specifically on the legislative branch. First, Congress is significantly more responsive to advocacy. There are representatives, they represent us, they're accountable to us, they're going to take a meeting with us, whereas, as a lot of you probably know from experience, it's a lot harder to get through to the executive, to the administration. And second, Congress does really play a lot of significant roles in impacting immigration. So question number 2, oops, you didn't realize you were going to get homework on this, did you? What can Congress not do? So these are 4 things. 3 of them Congress does have the ability to do. 1 of them Congress does not have the ability to do. The first option is to restrict funding for certain immigration policies. The second is to provide oversight for the implementation of immigration policy. The third is to pass an immigration law that the president doesn't like with a simple majority. And fourth is help to raise public support for changes in immigration policy. So think about 3 of these things Congress can do, 1 of them they cannot. And these are different avenues that we might use to impact Congress, or to have Congress impact immigration policy. Give you about 15 seconds to answer. All right. Looks like most of you have answered. All right. And here's the answer. So the only thing that Congress can't do on this list is the third option. They can't pass a law that the president doesn't like with a simple majority, because the president can veto any law that he doesn't like. And if he vetoes it, it then needs a 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate to override it, and that's really, really hard to get. So Congress may not be able to change immigration policies right away, but it does have other channels to influence change. And perhaps the most important is what's called the power of the purse, where Congress uses its role in setting the federal budget to fund or defund different programs. So that's the first option. It can restrict funding for certain immigration programs. Congress can also play an important oversight role. That's the second option. So they can write certain requirements into law that the administration then has to follow. So for example, they could ask DHS to report on conditions in detention centers, or they could ask the courts about their rejection rates for asylum seekers. And in the process of reporting that, that provides additional accountability, additional oversight that can help promote broader change. I think Congress can also be instrumental in raising public support as they present bills. Even if the bills aren't ultimately passed, it can put language out there, it can gain broader public support, you know, as they tweet about it or appear on news channels about it. Congress can also help just to promote the policies that we also think are important. So I have one final question for you, and then we're done with polling. The final question is, what is the most important thing for you to bring? We're talking now about meeting, whether in person or virtually, with members of Congress. What should you bring to these meetings? And the most important thing, you can bring more than one thing. The first is a deep understanding of immigration law and policy. The second is an understanding of the political climate. The third is a personal passion or interest in the topic you'll be bringing. And the fourth is your business card. And that's kind of a throwaway since I don't think many of us have given out a business card in 4 months or so. Give you 10 seconds to answer here. And welcome to the people who have joined since we started. Hopefully this was self-explanatory how to fill out the polling. All right, 5, 4, 3, get your answers in. And the majority of you have the answer that I wanted you to have. A personal passion or interest is the most important thing to bring in. Some of you here are experts in immigration policy, have deep understanding of the political climate or of immigration law. Absolutely bring that in. That's going to allow you to have a much more in-depth conversation on much more detailed levels. But even if you don't have that, you're still able to have really effective meetings with your members of Congress. They work for you. They want to hear from you. They want to know what the people in their district care about. And I think this is also why your work as volunteer advocates is so essential to our work. Because as part of our jobs in DC, we try to get meetings with people in DC to talk about certain issues, but sometimes people can be really hard to pin down. And I might email someone 3 times, no answer. I email them and say, hey, I have a constituent that wants to meet with you. Right away, doors open. So you help us get those meetings, and you also help to show them that these issues are more than just good policy, they're good re-election strategy because the people in their district care about them. So hopefully that was a good intro into why we're talking about advocating to Congress. And I think the natural question is, does this work, or how does this work? And so for that, I'm gonna turn it over to Tammy Alexander.
Great, thank you, Kate. That was a really fun poll and a really terrific overview of why advocacy to Congress matters. And so now I'm going to share my screen here and talk a little bit about, the question I get most often is, does it make a difference? Why should I do advocacy? Is it really going to change anything? The short answer is yes, it will. And I want to give you a few concrete examples of when that has happened. You're probably most familiar with this one, the most recent one, family separation. And this was a policy of the Trump administration back in 2018. They were forcibly separating families at the border. And there was a lot of pressure from the public, pressure from the media, but also from members of Congress. Members of Congress were reaching out to the media because they were getting a lot of phone calls from constituents about how bad people thought this policy was. And so they put pressure on the administration and they spoke out in public. And after about a month, that policy changed for the most part. There are not the vast number of family separations that there were back in 2018. So that was an important case where people really put pressure on Congress and talked to the media and made a difference in a policy issue. And then the next one is the DREAM Act. If you've been working on this issue for a while, you might remember that back in 2010, the Senate actually voted on the DREAM Act and came very close to passing it. They came within just a few votes of passing it. And the reason why that happened was because there was a huge campaign to mobilize voices to write letters to Congress and call their members of Congress. We were hearing from congressional staffers that there was just a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment out there. And they told us that it was really hard to pass bills because their phone calls were pretty much 10-to-1 anti-immigrant to pro-immigrant. And so we had an uphill struggle to really to deal with that. But we mobilized a lot of calls. The Interfaith Immigration Coalition had a big call-in day, and other organizations did as well. And so the week that the DREAM Act was voted on, congressional staffers were telling us that those calls were 1-to-1 in favor of the DREAM Act and against the DREAM Act, and that offices were really impressed that they were hearing from people that were in support of the DREAM Act. And so even though it didn't pass, that told members of Congress, and it also told the administration, at the time it was the Obama administration, it told them that that issue was important to voters. And so a couple of years later is when President Obama passed the DACA program, which helped Dreamers at least be safe from deportation. And Dreamers, if you don't know, sorry, Dreamers are immigrants who were brought to the US as children and have lived here since. And so it was all part of just a really important advocacy effort to get to the point where we got DACA in the first place. Another good example is the sanctuary movement. So this is where churches take immigrants into the church so that they can live there, they can have safe harbor and be safe from being deported. This often happens when there's a family and one of the parents is in danger of being deported, and the church will offer this sanctuary. And this hasn't just benefited individuals, it has also been a great advocacy talking point, because it's a way to get out one story that's a good example of why we shouldn't be targeting immigrants for deportation, and then link that to the larger systemic issues. And so the sanctuary movement has been very active advocating to Congress on these issues, and really mobilizing church members to advocate as well. And then the last one, this was from several years ago, but it gives a good example of why building a relationship with your office, with your members of Congress and their offices, can be really helpful. And so this was a member of Congress in Pennsylvania. It was a House member representative, and his constituents had been on a learning tour to the country of Colombia. And they felt very strongly about what they had learned. And so they went back and talked with his staffers and talked with him. And they were really pressing him to reduce military aid to Colombia and try to increase the aid that would go to things like sustainable development and things they felt were much more productive than military aid. And so they just kept talking with that office. They would have meetings and phone calls. And eventually that member really did come around to the point where he became kind of an advocate within Congress for more productive aid to Colombia, less military aid and more development aid. And so that just, yeah, I just want to stress that this shouldn't be just a one-time thing in talking with your member of Congress or having these meetings, that ideally you can set up a relationship so that that office knows that this is an issue that you care about, and you can keep coming to them as different issues arise, and just keep building that relationship. All right, so let's switch a little bit now, and we're going to talk about the current situation, particularly around asylum seekers. And I want to give an overview of the issues that you'll be talking about on your advocacy visits if you participate in the Advocacy Week a couple of weeks from now. So first of all, this is from a fact sheet that is at mcc.org/saferefuge. We'll also send a link to this fact sheet out in the follow-up email for the webinar. But this gives just a really brief overview of the ways that asylum seekers are being stopped from finding safe refuge in the United States. They're forced to wait for months. They're denied due process, so they don't get their day in court often. If they do make it into the US, they're put into detention centers. They're locked up under what's called mandatory detention, sometimes for months or even years. Often they are sent to Mexico under a program called Remain in Mexico. So they're sent to Mexico to wait for months for their immigration court hearings to happen. Some of them are sent to other countries. So if they're from Honduras, they might be sent from the US to Guatemala and told to apply for asylum there instead of in the United States. And then right now, the border is essentially closed to almost all asylum seekers. And the US government has used the COVID-19 pandemic as an excuse to do that. Even though other countries are still bringing asylum seekers in and there are safe ways to do that, particularly in letting people to reunite with family in the US and shelter in place and do the necessary quarantining. But there are definitely ways to bring people in safely, and that is just not happening at all right now. So the opportunities for advocacy. On the back side of that fact sheet, we have some recommendations for how we think asylum policy should be changed. And we are going to focus on recommendations number 1 and 4, if you look at that fact sheet. But I'm going to give a quick overview of those. In a nutshell, we're saying that the US should continue to be a safe refuge for people who are seeking protection from violence and persecution around the world. And we urge them to do that by 1, stopping funding for detention, for deportation, and then number 2, ending policies that have basically just completely halted legal access to asylum in the US. So that's in a nutshell. And in a little bit more detail, so the first ask, we are asking members of Congress to support 2 bills, the Refugee Protection Act and the Asylum Seeker Protection Act. And I'll go over a little bit of the first one, the Refugee Protection Act, that has been introduced in both the House and the Senate. And it would stop the criminal prosecution of asylum seekers, which happens too often now. It would reduce the use of detention. It would restore protections for people who are victims of domestic violence and gang violence. Those protections have largely been taken away so that it's really hard to apply for asylum if you're a victim of either domestic violence or gang violence. And for children who find themselves in immigration court by themselves, it would provide lawyers for them. And then second, the Asylum Seeker Protection Act, that would prohibit funding for the Remain in Mexico program. That's the program that requires people to wait outside the US for their court hearing, often in camps and shelters and just really difficult conditions. And then the second big ask is to end funding for some of these programs that are really harming asylum seekers. So end funding for border militarization, for detention, and for other programs that undermine asylum. And as Kate said, you know, one important method that Congress has for shaping immigration policy right now is that power of the purse. And this is a great time to be advocating on these issues because Congress is debating their annual funding bills right now. And so telling them what you want them to spend money on and what you don't want them to spend money on is a really, really important thing that you can do right now. And so we're asking them to end funding for those programs, but then we're asking them to redirect that funding instead to support humanitarian assistance at the border and to support foreign assistance that addresses the root causes of migration in the countries where asylum seekers are coming from, and then to support alternatives to detention. So there are programs like the Family Case Management Program and other programs that allow people to be with their families in the community, but still monitored and still accountable to appear for their court hearings as those happen. And those programs are so much cheaper than holding people in detention and so much more humane, of course. All right, so if you're thinking of questions while I'm presenting this, I should say, go ahead and type them in the Q&A feature and we will collect those and we will answer them at the end. All right, so I gave you the technical policy, the wonky policy asks for your meetings, but it's just as important or probably more important, as Kate pointed out, that you share why this issue is important with you. And one way you can do that is through stories. You can share stories about asylum seekers that are in your community, either people that you know or people that you've read about in the newspaper. It's really important to try to characterize asylum seekers as real people too, you know, people with families and churches and hobbies and jobs and things that they care about, and so that they're not just statistics, but that they're real people that come to life for the staffers or the members of Congress that you're speaking with. If you know of asylum seekers who are working as grocery store workers or hospital workers or home health care aides, highlight those contributions. If you know of a church or you're at a church that's helping asylum seekers or a nonprofit who's supporting asylum seekers in your community, highlight that. And then maybe if you don't have those stories, if you have a family immigration history of your own, if your ancestors fled violence and persecution, you can highlight that and you can say, if my ancestors came today, they would not be able to find safety in the United States. And then just what calls you to this advocacy? You know, why are you listening to this webinar today? Why are you doing visits? Just what motivates you to do this? And that could be a spiritual, religious motivation too. And you can absolutely share those in your meetings as well. All right, and I will turn it back over to Kate.
Thanks, Tammy. So Tammy shared kind of what we're hoping that you're able to share in your meetings. And now I'm going to go into how you actually do that. I started working in the Washington office a year ago, and I was kind of amazed when I started that, hey, anyone can just walk into these buildings and meet with their Senate offices. Anyone can just pick up the phone and call. There's, you know, I think sometimes we have this idea like you have to be a trained lobbyist or anything like that, but that's not true. It's much easier than you might think to set up these meetings and then to lead them in a successful way. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick with some quick tips for a roadmap on how to do successful advocacy meetings. And I'm going to talk about these as virtual meetings because that's sort of our reality right now. But many of the same things also apply to the in-person meetings that we'll hopefully return to eventually. To start off, if you join us for one of our planned advocacy events, we'll help you set up the meeting. But you're actually able to set up the meeting yourself. If you just call the office of your representative and speak to their scheduler and say, hi, I'm a constituent, I'm interested in this issue, I'd love to find a time to talk with someone on the staff, you're able to, you'll be able to, you'll be able to set that meeting up. So once you have the meeting set up, let's see, the important thing is first to prepare. The most successful meetings are the most well-prepared ones. So gather all the people together that are going to be meeting in the office. Decide beforehand who's going to say what stories you're going to share, what specific asks you're going to have. Make sure you know the time, make sure you know how you'll be calling in, and have all of that figured out before you're suddenly on the phone line with the member of Congress or with the staffer. Now we'll fast forward to the big event itself. Often we've been having meetings on Zoom calls. The member of Congress or the staffer calls in. Just a quick note, I would say 9 out of 10 meetings that we have or more are with the staff of a congressional office and not the member of Congress themselves. You shouldn't feel bad if you get a staffer instead of the senator or congressperson. That's still effective, and often you're able to have longer and more in-depth conversations with the staff than you would with a member of Congress. So either way, it can be an effective way to share advocacy. So have someone on the line to be able to right away greet them, make some friendly conversation as they're logging on. Introduce yourselves, and again, rehearse this. Know what you're going to say in 2 or 3 sentences. Introduce your name, your affiliation, if you're representing an organization or a church, what connections you have to the community. Remember that it's really important to be a constituent of this particular member of Congress. So share things that tie you to that community, where you volunteer, where you go to church, and then what brought you onto this call in the first place. Try to keep this really brief, especially if there are a lot of people in your meeting, because otherwise you can see the whole meeting go by with just people introducing themselves. Say thank you. It's important to always start off on the right foot, right? And you don't want to come in kind of ready to disagree with them. Try to find something that you're able to thank them for. Even if it's just at the bare minimum, thanks for taking the time to meet with me. I know some of us have members of Congress that are pretty diametrically opposed to the beliefs that we have, but you can often still find something to thank them for. Maybe you disagree with their immigration policies, but they've helped small businesses in your area. Thanking them for that shows you're paying attention and shows that you are having this meeting kind of in good faith. After you've thanked them, introduce your ask. And again, the important thing here is to keep it brief, to keep it concise, to keep it specific. If I come into a meeting and I say, hi, I want you to support immigrants, That's great. That helps them know that I care about immigrants, but it doesn't give them, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to interpret that. And they may counter with something like, well, I'm helping immigrants by, keeping them at the place where they came from, or just really twisting words out of the way. So if you're able to make your ask very specific, please co-sponsor this bill. Please vote yes on this bill. Please make a public statement in favor of this thing. Then that gives the staffer a very specific thing to bring to the member of Congress. And it kind of puts them on the spot to say yes or no whether or not they'll support that. And you can give relevant background information, you can give statistics or brief stories, but I want to focus you mostly to the next step, which is to tell your story or stories. And as Tammy highlighted too, really important to try to make this connection personal. And this is also an opportunity to connect the issue to the values and priorities that the member of Congress has. And so this is why it's so important to do your prep work. You don't want to go into a meeting with a really pro-immigration person ready to fight with them when they're already on the same page as you. And at the same time, you don't want to go into a meeting with somebody who might oppose you on these bills, thinking that it's going to be an easy, straightforward call. Maybe the person is really pro-family. You could tell stories about how asylum can keep families together. Or maybe they're pro-economic growth. You can tell stories about how immigrants contribute to the economies and are more likely to start small businesses or help support the economy. I think this is a lot of the sort of strategy. You can have the same asks generally, but know how to tailor them or present them in a way that will be more interesting to the person that you're talking to. After you've told your story, make sure to take a break and ask what they think. I know when I first started, sometimes I would get really excited and I'd say my piece and then would forget to ask or give them a chance to talk. And it's really important to give them a chance to respond, to kind of put them on the spot a little bit and say, okay, what do you think? Like, does this sound like a bill that the senator would support? Or what has the congressman done on this issue? This is a chance for them to tell you whether or not they might agree or disagree, or what the specific points of disagreement are. And that's really important information for you to bring into follow-up meetings, because then in your next meeting, you can specifically refer back to those specific points that they bring up. They may have lots of questions for you. You may not be able to answer all of them, and that's completely fine. If there's something that kind of stumps you, please don't make something up. Just say, that's a great question. I'm going to look it up and I'll get back to you. That's an opportunity for follow-up, and it gives you the chance to reach out to us or to reach out to other people that you're working with to make sure that you have a good informed answer. I've been on calls where people just say something that sounds good, and that's really not helpful, because then often someone else has to step in and fix the misconceptions, and it can be confusing for the people that you're meeting with. So after you've had this sort of chance for a back and forth, repeat the ask again. If you heard specific things from their response, maybe you can respond directly to them as you rephrase the ask in a way that you think is most relevant to them. Make sure you're thanking the staffer at the end. It can be kind of fun. I've been on calls where people take screenshots of the Zoom call, and then that's something you can share on social media to promote later. But try to end on the time that you've granted at the beginning. If you say this is going to be a 30-minute call, make sure you end in 30 minutes. Staffers are busy, and everyone will be happier if you keep to the time that you originally requested. And then finally, the last step I want to raise is make sure you're following up. So this is your introduction to them, you introducing them to the issue. But within 2 or 3 days of the meeting, you should make sure you're sending a follow-up meeting with additional sources and documents, repeat the asks. It gives you an opportunity to answer any questions that they might have raised. And if you wait a couple weeks and you don't hear back from them, go ahead and follow up again, 2-3 weeks later, and say, hey, have you had a chance to show this bill to your boss? What did they think? Have you made a decision? They may not ever end up supporting the bill, but at least you've sort of put them on the spot to need to come up with a good reason of why they didn't support it. You're sort of putting them on the spot to have to be accountable for why they're not supporting the issue that you think is important. So I know many of you have been in lots of these meetings. I'd say feel free to send us a quick chat and let us know about some of the things that have worked well for you. We'll try to read those off at the end if we have time. But just to quickly run through some other general tips, especially for virtual meetings. Just highlight again, make sure that you're meeting with your own members of Congress. Sometimes members of Congress might get frustrated if someone requests a meeting and they're not actually from their district. They want to keep their time for the people that do live in their district. So even if you want to meet with someone who's the head of an important committee or something like that, you're going to be much more effective if you regularly meet with the people that actually do represent you. Be polite. I hope I don't have to tell you this, but you know, this is the start of a relationship. And if you start off arguing or criticizing, you know, in a rude or closed off way, they're not going to want to take your next meeting, and your advocacy is going to end there. If you're polite, you can absolutely disagree with them. You can push them on what they believe. But if you do that in a polite and respectful way, they're much more likely to want to meet with you again. Be professional. Be aware of I mean, we've all seen the Zoom videos, the things going on in the background, the lack of muted mics. Just be aware of how you're presenting on the call and try to be in a place that minimizes distractions. As I said, be specific. I know all of you here care about a lot of things, and that's great. But your 30-minute meeting is not your chance to share your entire political vision, because that's just too much information and it's not actionable. Try as much as possible to boil it down to one specific topic, one or two specific asks, so that they're able to walk away from that meeting and say, hey, this person cares about asylum, and they want me to look at these two bills and defund these programs in the appropriations process. They should be able to take that away without having to even necessarily write a bunch of notes down or follow up on a bunch of things. You being clear helps them to do that follow-up. Be creative. I've been really impressed by some of the meetings that I've sat in on, these virtual advocacy meetings. I remember somebody told a story, and while they were telling the story, they shared their screen and shared a couple of photos that illustrated their trip to this country that they were speaking about. I definitely don't recommend that you put together PowerPoint presentations. I think that's a little distracting, but yeah, some photos like that or some creative ways to kind of bring your stories to life, I think are welcome. And then, as I said, just reiterating, be persistent. As you're requesting meetings, you might not hear back right away. You might have to pester them a little bit, 2-3 times. Hey, I just wondered if you would have a time to meet. Hey, does next week work for you? Hey, what about Thursday at 2? But almost always they will get back to you. They do want to hear from you. And I would say the same thing as well. After you meet, keep asking them, hey, what did you think about that asylum bill? Hey, have you had a chance to review it? Hey, what did you think? I think all of those are really successful just mindsets to have as you're doing this advocacy work. So it was just a bit of intro. And now we're going to have a chance to kind of see what this looks like in action. So Tammy's going to explain what's next.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. All right, so when we do these trainings in person, we often will have you do a role play so that you can get a feel for how these meetings go. But since we can't do that here, Kate and I are going to do a couple of role plays. We are going to give you an example of a meeting that doesn't go so well, and then we'll give you an example of a meeting that hopefully will go better. So we're going to both turn our videos off for a minute here, and then we'll turn them back on and start. I think you're on mute.
Oh, yeah. So are you my senator?
No, I'm Tammy Alexander. I'm the one you were emailing with. I'm an immigration staffer in her office.
Oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah. So I'm Kate.
Great, nice to meet you, Kate. And you live in Michigan?
Yeah. Smitten with the mitten, like they say.
Right.
Oh,
Yes.
right. So the reason I emailed you is I wanted to talk to you about asylum. That's an issue that's really important to me. Just a second. Gotta look up what I'm supposed to say. Yeah. Okay, so ready? Please end funding for border militarization, detention, and programs that undermine asylum. Instead, support humanitarian assistance at the border, foreign assistance that addresses the root causes of migration. Got it?
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing those points. I appreciate that. I will definitely bring those to my boss. Was there a particular piece of legislation that you wanted to flag for us?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I think I forgot to write it down. It was like immigrant protection or something protection act.
Okay. Well, if you remember the specific bill, feel free to email it to me. You have my email address, right?
I mean, yeah, but like you could look it up because like you're in Congress.
Yeah, we'll be sure to do that. All right. Was there anything else that you wanted to share with us today?
What's that? Oh, just a second. I'll be right there. I'm in the middle of a meeting. I'll be like 2 minutes. Sorry, what?
Did you have anything else you wanted to share today, or was that it?
No. Okay, so there's this pothole in front of my house. My car makes the worst sound every time I drive over it. It drives me crazy.
Yeah, that sounds super frustrating.
Really
Unfortunately,
frustrating.
that's more of a local issue, so I would suggest contacting your local officials about that one.
Oh, I mean, if you could do something about it, that'd be great. But like, I guess, okay. I mean, whatever you say. Yeah. Anyway, so asylum, like, definitely, like, get back to me on that, please.
Yeah, absolutely will do. I'll pass all these comments on to the senator. And I'm sorry, I've got another meeting. I'm sorry to cut this short, but
Oh,
I need to go
already?
prepare for another meeting. But
Okay.
yeah, it was good talking with you.
Yeah,
Thanks
yeah.
for reaching out.
Good talking to you too. Okay, bye.
All right, bye. All right, so you all can probably identify some of the things that didn't go so well in that visit. Kate had a very distracting background. She clearly wasn't prepared, didn't even introduce herself. She also didn't share any stories. I mean, even if she would have gotten the policy facts right, she really didn't share anything that was from the heart or said, why she cared about this issue. Also clearly distracted, not really paying attention to what the staffer was saying, and bringing up other irrelevant issues. I mean, this one was really irrelevant, but bringing up issues that the staffer really couldn't do anything about. So, all right, we will now give you an example of a meeting that will hopefully go much better. All right.
Hi, Tammy. Thanks so much for taking the time to meet with me this afternoon. I'm Kate Parsons. I'm calling as part of Mennonite Central Committee's Safe Refuge Advocacy Week. And as I said in my email, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to why I would like the Senator to co-sponsor the Refugee Protection Act and the Asylum Seeker Protection Act.
Yeah, it's great to meet with you today. Kate, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Jackson, Michigan, where I'm a registered voter.
No way, Jackson. My grandmother lives in Woodville, which I think is like a stone's throw from Jackson. Yeah, we're always visiting her, and we go get ice cream at the Parlor. I love that place. Do you know that?
Way. Yeah, I was just there. Yeah, I mean, since the pandemic, I haven't been able to go, but that was a favorite for my family for so long. Oh, that's so fun that I'm neighbors with your grandma.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so, I grew up in Michigan, and I really appreciate what the senator's done for the state. I wanted to thank her in particular for the bill she recently introduced to ensure that Michigan schools are able to reopen safely. I think that's really important.
Oh, yeah, that's very important to the senator. Yeah, we were very proud of that bill, and just trying to do what we can to get the schools open, like you said, safely, and provide for distance learning where that's needed. And yeah, so thanks. I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, thank you. And again, the reason why I asked for this call is specifically to talk about asylum. And asylum, as you know, is when somebody is facing violence or persecution in their home country and then seeks the protection in the United States. And this is an issue that's really personal to me because while I grew up in Michigan, I spent the last couple years actually living in Honduras, where many people are fleeing to seek asylum. I worked with a nonprofit organization down there, and for some time lived in a community that was under gang control and had a lot of people who suffered from violence. I just remember coming home one day and seeing a crowd of people clustered around someone who had very tragically been killed. He worked on the buses that went into the community and wasn't able to come up with the extortion tax that gangs were asking, and because of that, he lost his life. So I
Wow.
know, yeah, very personally, the cost that people face, particularly from gang violence, and how the police and courts locally there aren't able to respond effectively. So the only way that they're able to really protect their lives and the lives of their family is to flee the country and to look for protection elsewhere. That's something I'm really proud that the United States has, or historically has had, asylum laws to protect people like my old neighbors. And these are laws, as you may know, that go back, to the aftermath of the Second World War, when the United States realized how many lives it could have saved by welcoming in Jewish people fleeing the Holocaust. And asylum laws, until recently, were continuing to save lives and welcome people into our communities, but these laws are just being dismantled piece by piece. I believe that the United States has a responsibility to offer a safe refuge to people seeking asylum, and I think that this can be a win for the United States too. Asylum seekers contribute to economies, they revitalize economically depressed areas. I'm sure you're familiar in Detroit, a lot of that economic revitalization was thanks to immigrant families who came and invested in businesses and were entrepreneurs there. So I just wanted to share briefly why this is such a personal issue to me, and why I think it's the right thing for us to do as a country, and good for the state of Michigan too. So I did just want to hear what exactly the center has done to protect asylum seekers recently.
Yeah. First, thank you so much for sharing those stories, and thank you for the work you did. And those are just really powerful stories. I can tell you the senator is very concerned about these issues. She signed on to a letter last fall about Remain in Mexico and the problems with that program. I think that was Senator Durbin that had circulated that letter that she signed on to. And so we've been following the border issues very closely, issues in detention centers with the spread of COVID-19. So this is definitely on our radar. Are there specific pieces of legislation that you wanted us to take a look at?
Yeah, thank you for asking. There's two bills in particular that I think would be really effective in meeting the needs of these people. The first is the Refugee Protection Act, which one of the things it does is it ensures protections for people who are fleeing gang violence. And as I said, this is something that costs the lives of so many people in these countries. And I think it's really important that we recognize that is a significant cause of violence and persecution, that people are unable to stay safe in their home countries against gang violence and also domestic violence. In addition, it prohibits the criminal prosecution of asylum seekers, and it reduces the use of detention, which I think is really important to consider, especially right now as we've seen COVID-19 spread through detention centers in a way that's really dangerous for the people who are inside. So that's the Refugee Protection Act. There's also the Asylum Seeker Protection Act that basically prohibits the use of U.S. funds to implement or enforce policies that are sending people unsafely back to Mexico. I mean, if you can imagine getting stuck in a country where you don't know anybody, where you don't have any money or resources or connections, and then being forced to wait there indefinitely, it's really not something that I believe our country should support.
Okay, yeah, we can definitely take a look at those bills. On the first one, I know we've had this group of constituents that keeps coming to us about the family case management program for folks in detention. Do you know if that first bill includes that program?
That's a good question. I'm not able to answer that right now, but I work with a great team that's super knowledgeable about these bills. So I'll check with them. And is it all right if I follow up with you by email
Yeah.
in the next day or two? Okay,
Yeah,
awesome.
that would be terrific. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
So I'll definitely follow up with you on that. And I have some other background information that I'd like to share just about this, why I support these bills and what these bills entail and I think would do for our country.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, please, send me whatever information you have and I'll take a look at it and report back to the senator.
Thank you so much. Well, and I know you said you only had 15 minutes. I know we're coming right up on that, but I just really appreciate you taking the time on this busy appropriations time where I'm sure you're all caught up in that. So again, thank you so much for listening, and I'll be in touch soon.
Yeah, I appreciate you adhering to those 15 minutes. Thank you so much. It was great talking with you.
All right, goodbye.
All right, bye-bye. Yeah, do you want to start the debrief on this one, Kate, since you did so well?
Well, I would just say, and again, I hope this was a sign that you didn't have to be perfect. I definitely had my share of ums and uhs and maybe could have gotten stories out smoother, but that's just the general overview of what we hope a meeting might look like. And if you have, again, tips or suggestions or things that have worked well for you, drop them in the Q&A, drop them in the chat. We have some time now to hear what you would like to hear from us. So I don't know if we want to start with the Q&A here, or if there were specific points you wanted to make, Tammy.
Yeah, well, maybe just to say, you noticed us making some small talk there at the beginning, and that does happen very often in these meetings. You know, they know that you're their constituent, and so especially in a House district, you could definitely have family connections or school connections or something. And so it's great if you can do that, especially in an office that maybe might not be that friendly to your ask. It really takes the edge off the conversation if you can make some of those personal connections. But yeah, Kate did a great job sharing a personal story and just briefly summarizing the asks and kept to the 15 minutes. That was so good too, because yeah, especially right now, these staffers are very busy. And so if you say you're gonna do 15 minutes and you can do that, they will really appreciate that.
Yeah, I would say most of the meetings that I've had have been a sort of 30-minute time frame, but some people will ask to get off earlier. And sometimes you really pique people's interest. They want to hear your stories, and they'll say, I've got 20 minutes. And then, you know, after 45 minutes, they're still chatting. So
yes.
It definitely depends. Some people, I see some questions about where do we find what bills are being addressed? And so
yeah,
we'll get to all of that, I think, as we talk about next steps, and then we can dive into the rest of the questions.
Yes. Let's talk about next steps real quick. This will just be a few minutes, and then we'll turn it back over to Saulo to do the Q&A time. All right. Okay, so first, if you have not yet registered for the Safe Refuge Advocacy Week, July 27th to 31, please do that. We would love for folks to register by July 22nd, and that will be in the follow-up email if you don't have that link. So we will send you that link to register. And then we will also be sending the resources that we've cited. I think they've been put in the chat also, but the two main resources to help you with those meetings are the meeting guide and the fact sheet. Those are really the only things that you need. And then of course, your own stories that you bring to the meetings. And then other ways to take action, if you can't do the advocacy week or hopefully after the advocacy week, please do sign up for our action alerts if you don't get those already. It's a great way to find out about call-in days and campaigns like this, and to get sample letters to write your members of Congress. We also have a monthly e-memo newsletter, which will contain information on not just immigration, but all of the issues we advocate on. Also, please engage with your member on social media. Kate mentioned it's great to take a picture of the Zoom call if you're doing a Zoom call, and then put it on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, and say, hey, I met with Senator Brownback today, or whoever. And you can do that at other times of the year as well. I mean, not just when you have a meeting, but if there's an issue that comes up, so you're seeing family separations in the news, and that's an issue that's really, really getting to you, you can tweet right at your member of Congress. You can look up their Twitter handle. You can find them on Facebook or Instagram. And so it's just a really good way to engage if you're on those social media platforms. Also, writing a letter to the editor. This is something you could do to follow up after the meetings too. These are really short letters. They're usually 250 words or less, and pretty easy to get into your local paper if you write them short like that. And so it's a good way just to let your community know what issues you're thinking about, and your members of Congress will read those letters as well. They read their local papers, and so they'll see that you're writing about asylum in the newspaper. And then, of course, we do have an election coming up, not just national elections, but local elections. And so engaging with those elections can be a very important way to get your voice heard. We have an election resource that we will send out in the follow-up email. And that is mainly to help people engage at town hall events and candidate forums. And a lot of these events are, of course, going online now, but if you're attending a virtual town hall and you want to ask some questions about immigration, there's some sample questions in there for how you can engage on that issue. All right, and now I will turn it over to Saulo to facilitate the Q&A time.
Wow, thank you, Tammy and Kate. That was amazing. Thank you so much for that. We do have a few questions. One coming from Emily Miller, and she's asking, are HR 5210 and S2936 using the same language, or will then need to be run through committee again to ensure the same language?
I feel like this is one of those questions I might have to say I'll follow up later, but I'm pretty sure they are the same language in both places. Yeah.
All right, good.
Just really quick, for those of you who maybe are less familiar with how bills are structured and look, that HR stands for House Resolution. It means it's a bill on the House of Representatives, and the S means it's a bill on the Senate side. And then those numbers are, cycled through every, congressional term. So that's what each set of numbers identifies that particular bill.
And and Emily's question was speaking to, if there are different bills passed in the House and Senate, then they have to go through a whole process to reconcile the changes. But I'm pretty sure here that it was a concerted strategy between the House and the Senate to introduce the same bill in both places. Yeah.
Great. And another question related to bills is, where do we find what bills are being addressed in the Senate and in the House?
Yeah, I think signing up for our action alerts and e-memo is one of the places. Yeah, Kate, did you have anything else?
I was going to say, definitely plug for us too, but also as you, if you have particular issues that you're interested in, signing up for advocacy groups that advocate on that particular topic.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, I think that's the beauty of getting plugged into organizations with advocacy staff, is that it's our job to track these bills. And so we can help be kind of the bridge between all this complicated, congressional processes and what's actually moving forward and what's actually the most effective to advocate on, and then can sort of let you know. There are congress.gov, all of the bills are shared publicly, and we can definitely share links of where you can find those bills and see who's sponsoring them and who's supporting them. But in terms of strategically which ones you should support, I would recommend following us and following other partner organizations that do advocacy work on the issues you care about.
Yeah, there are probably hundreds of immigration bills out there, but we can let you know which 5 or 6 might be moving and the most important. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then also, when we are finally back to in-person visits, then will it be more effective? And this question comes from Jennifer. Is it more effective to go in with a group or of people rather than individually?
Yeah, I think either way can be effective. Sometimes if you're in a group, let's say a group from your church, it does show that there's more interest than just you going by yourself. I think if you bring the experience that Kate in that second call brought, I think that's a great individual visit because she brought some really solid experience to that. But if you don't have that, trying to get a few people or a larger group from your church to go with you, I think does demonstrate that you have a lot of support in your community.
Yeah, I would say probably almost always it's better to have a big group, with the big caveat that you should practice together, because trying to be on a call with 20 people and keep it to 30 minutes, right. You need to know when to stop talking. And that's a good facilitator, and lots of practice will help you really show the widespread support you have for that issue.
Yeah, and as somebody who has gone both ways, by myself and with one of you from the Washington office or with a group as well, I do feel more comfortable going with a group. In some ways we also can bounce from each other sometimes when we're talking to the staffer as well. But also it feels like then you're bringing your peeps to the conversation as well, and you feel more supported as well. So it feels good. one of the questions that also I have is, well, we are having presidential elections in 111 days, 9 hours, 58 minutes, and 48 seconds.
Who's
Who's
counting?
counting, right? Who's counting? And so I'm wondering, do you know how can we get involved? What are things that we should be doing right now? And also, what are the candidates saying? We know what the current administration is doing and where it's going. Do we know from the other side what are they proposing?
Yeah, I mean, I think our election resource is a great place to start, but also to find out about what candidates are thinking. Following them on social media can be one good way to see that. Following their campaign pages, especially for members of Congress. If you have a Senate race in your state or a House member who has a strong opponent, look at what their different views are. Their campaign pages will often have a section on immigration that you can look at.
All right, Kate, do you have anything?
Yeah, and just the point I think we made for what that election resource is sort of for is if you show up to a town hall meeting where they're actually taking questions, some suggested questions that you can ask to really push them on issues. Really, it helps to get people on record. And so if there's an issue you care about, like asylum, to actually show that you support it, but also put them on the spot to respond about what they plan to do is helpful for advocacy as well during this election season.
Excellent. Yeah, and also, do you know, or do you have a sense of how informed are most staffers at the offices around the issues that we bring, asylum or anything else, foreign policy? What is your experience?
That's a great question, and I would say the answer varies widely. There are people who you come in and they say, "Oh, well, pursuant to X law, point, number," and they're like way beyond me, and I say, "Well, I care about asylum and that's what I'm bringing." But then there are other people who, you might be surprised that they have very limited knowledge and a lot of the things we're sharing that might seem obvious to us are new to them. And I think that speaks to just how many things are on the plates of congressional staff. They may deal with immigration and healthcare and transportation and all these other things together. And different offices will set different priorities. So you may have some offices that really are doing a lot of work on immigration bills, others that really aren't. So I know Tammy does more direct advocacy on immigration and can speak to that, but I would say you shouldn't assume that every meeting they're going to know more than you, because that's often not true.
Yeah, it really varies, and you just have to be prepared for which way it's going to go. Yeah.
So then how do we know, do we do this in faith, knowing that our message will get to the congressman or the person, the legislator, or do we expect an email or a note back from them? What happens after the meeting?
Yeah, well, I think you should definitely expect the staffer to be taking those notes back to the member of Congress. Ideally, I think Kate mentioned this, but sending them a thank you note after the meeting in an email to follow up with any materials that you promised to send, but also that will remind them about the visit if they haven't followed up. You can even follow up later if the bill comes up for a vote later on or starts getting some attention. You can follow up and remind them. If you do send an email, often you will get a response back. If you send a physical letter, you'll often get a letter back. Sometimes they're not super helpful because they're form letters. Sometimes they do take more time to respond. It really depends on the issue and depends on the office. Yeah.
Right. Well, I don't know if the attendees have any more questions, or if you have anything else to add to your presentation at this point. I am seeing that people are having difficulty hearing me. Okay.
Oh, speak up. No, please do send more questions. I think just a point that I'd make is people were sort of wondering when stay-at-home orders started, what is immigration or what is advocacy even going to look like in this time period? It's pretty unprecedented, but I've been really pleasantly surprised by how open offices continue to be to meet with constituents. And actually it opens doors because, first of all, some staff at least have a little bit more time and maybe appreciate the distraction in their normal day-to-day and are willing to take a meeting. And second of all, we're able to invite people to join from who might not have been able to come to DC before for different reasons. So I think I've been seeing more diverse and more broader groups of people able to join these calls and meet with staffers. And there's a little bit of weirdness to doing it through the screen, but I think we're learning how to do all sorts of things through a screen, and it's really encouraging to see how advocacy is definitely continuing in this time, and your participation is really helpful.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tammy, sorry, you want to say something?
Yeah, and for some, it's made it easier to do this advocacy too, because you can do it literally from your living room, and especially you can now talk with staff in Washington, D.C. even from your living room, and that was something that would have been more difficult to do before. So in a way, in a lot of significant ways, I think this has actually opened up some new avenues to do advocacy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people are asking right now too, is right now a good moment to do immigration advocacy, right? With COVID-19 being the focus of everything right now, is it the right time to do this? And I think, yes, all the stuff coming up right now that you're bringing up, all these issues. So, the question is there a good time? When can we be more effective in doing advocacy? Is this the right time?
Yeah, I mean, you're right that the focus is definitely on COVID-19. But as we said earlier in the webinar, Congress is still going about its regular business. They are very much working on the annual budget bills right now, the federal spending bills. And so speaking into that work is very important. And there are certainly aspects of this that relate to COVID-19 as well. And I think sometimes in offices where you may struggle to get them to listen to these concerns, highlighting those issues that relate to COVID-19 could be helpful. How it's spreading in detention centers, or the concerns about people with COVID-19 being deported to other countries like Guatemala and Haiti and India. So you can kind of feel that out, and where you can relate that to the concerns about the pandemic, I think would be helpful.
Right.
I'll just share quickly too. I was in one meeting where I was talking about a different issue that's definitely not on a national radar right now. And the staffer actually told me, thank you, we don't want to let the urgent be the enemy of the important, or the also important. And so just because the whole national attention is, I think, very rightly turned to racial injustice and COVID-19, as it should be, but that doesn't mean that we can't also be raising these other issues. And actually, there may be even additional impetus to be making sure that we don't forget about these very urgent realities, like people stuck at the southern border and people at high risk in detention centers, people being deported to these countries where they run the risk of spreading COVID-19 in these countries. So I think now is as good a time as ever.
Right, great. Well, thank you so much. I think we have answered all the questions that came our way. And so do you have any final words for our participants?
I think I just say sometimes we get asked, can I talk about other immigration issues while I'm in there talking about asylum? And I'd say if you're by yourself, sure. If you're in a group, make sure that you work that into the structure of the group meeting first and get everyone's okay. But for instance, I think a lot of folks will want to talk about DACA right now, knowing that the Supreme Court decision just happened, and we're still not sure what the Trump administration is going to do. So they might want to bring up something about that. And I think that's fine to do after you've made your asks and done everything else. But again, if you're with a group, make sure that they're okay with you bringing that up, and that there's time to do that. Yeah, I wouldn't though bring up, say, something about Palestine, because you're probably meeting with the staffer who works on immigration issues. They're probably not very familiar with foreign policy. And so sticking to the general topic of immigration would be good.
I think my closing comment is just come join us, please. We are setting up a week where we want to just coordinate having as many people as possible to set up meetings with their staff. Someday, it would be great if everyone here learns how to set those meetings up on their own, but right now we'll set them up for you. We'll walk you through it. We'll give you the leave behinds. We'll recommend the asks to bring to these offices. And I think the benefit of doing those all together in 1 week is hopefully broader movement all at once. It's not just one office, but multiple offices all hearing from constituents about these particular bills. So if you want to be part of that, Rochelle shared the link. Please register and we'll follow up with you with more information about how to prepare and how to join us for what we're calling Safe Refuge Advocacy Week. Hopefully you learned today that it's not too difficult and it's very effective to do.
Yeah, you're going to find that it's so much easier than you thought it would be. Without fail, when we do these meetings, folks are just, oh, that wasn't so hard. You know, I can do that now. So I think you all will have that experience as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much to both of you and the Washington office for your dedication to this work and for the excellent information shared today. Thank you to all the attendees who set aside time today for this informational webinar. The webinar has been recorded and will be available on the webinar registration page tomorrow. You will receive an email with the link to the recording, additional actions and resources mentioned by our panelists as well. So have a good rest of your day, and thank you for attending this webinar. Bye.
Bye.